Welcome, brave souls, to a journey into the heart of terror. On Halloween night, when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, some road trips become more than just a drive. They turn into nightmares. Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying true tales of Halloween night road trips that took a dark and twisted turn. So buckle up, keep your eyes on the road, and whatever you do, don't look back. The first story is about the Midnight Road. It was Halloween night, the time of year when the veil between the living and the dead is said to be at its thinnest. The streets were adorned with Halloween decorations, flickering jack-o'-lanterns, and the eerie glow of orange lights. The air was thick with the smell of burning leaves and the distant echoes of Halloween sounds. Laughter, screams, and the occasional hoot of an owl. 3 friends, Jake, Lisa, and Eric, were on a mission to find the truth behind a chilling tale they had stumbled upon in the depths of a dark web horror story. Their destination was an abandoned mining town, a place forgotten by time, shrouded in mystery and said to be cursed. The town, simply known as Hollow Creek, had become infamous on Reddit as the subject of countless scary Reddit stories and true horror stories. According to legend, the entire population of Hollow Creek had vanished without a trace one Halloween night over a century ago. Now it was said that the spirits of the missing residents wandered the town, waiting to claim the souls of any who dared enter. Jake, ever the skeptic, had dismissed the tales as nothing more than a fascinating horror story. Lisa, who had a penchant for the paranormal, was eager to investigate, while Eric, the group's resident horror fanatic, had been the one to suggest the trip in the first place after hearing about it on a podcast horror episode. They had loaded up the car with snacks, a portable pot smoke machine for the inevitable spooky Halloween music session, and a makeshift mist maker to set the mood when they arrived at the town. As they drove through the desolate countryside, the darkness around them deepened. The road ahead seemed endless, a black ribbon stretching into oblivion. The only light came from the car's headlights, which barely penetrated the inky blackness. The usual chatter and laughter that accompanied their road trips were absent, replaced by a heavy silence. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. "Do you think this place is really haunted?" Lisa asked, breaking the silence. Jake scoffed. "It's just another urban legend. Someone probably made it up to scare people." Eric, his eyes glued to the GPS, didn't seem as sure. "The stories I've heard are pretty consistent. People who visit this place never come back the same, if they come back at all." The GPS signal flickered and died as they approached the town. The device's screen went blank, leaving them without a guide. "Great," Jake muttered. "We're on our own now." As they rounded a bend, the car's radio, which had been silent for the duration of the trip, crackled to life. The static filled the car, making them all jump. Before Jake could switch it off, a voice emerged from the noise, a deep, gravelly tone that sent chills down their spines. "Welcome to Midnight Horror Station, your gateway to the world of horror. Tonight's broadcast comes to you live from Hollow Creek. Stay tuned for the latest in true horror stories, paranormal investigations, and analog horror reactions." Jake turned the radio off, but the voice continued to speak, the static growing louder. "What the hell?" Eric said, glancing at the radio. "It's off. How is it still playing?" The voice on the radio began to tell a story, one that sounded eerily familiar. It was the tale of Hollow Creek, of how the townspeople had vanished without a trace, their last moments captured on a series of found footage horror tapes that had been discovered decades later. The story was identical to the one they had read online, down to the smallest detail. "This is too weird," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "Let's just turn around and go back." But the road behind them had disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. There was no going back. They were trapped on this Halloween night road trip, with only the radio's haunting voice to keep them company. The further they drove, the more distorted the voice on the radio became. It was as if the signal was being warped by some unseen force, twisting the words into something monstrous. The car's temperature dropped, the windows fogging up despite the heater being on full blast. The mist outside grew thicker, turning the world into a blurry nightmare, Suddenly, the radio cut out, replaced by an unsettling noise, a low, pulsating hum that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. It was a sound that defied explanation, something not of this world. The car's headlights flickered, and for a brief moment, they thought they saw something moving in the mist. A shadow, tall and thin, its features indistinguishable. Jake gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa nodded, too frightened to speak. Eric reached for his phone, hoping to capture whatever it was on video, but the device refused to turn on. Every electronic device in the car seemed to be dead, as if something was draining the power. The road ahead began to twist and turn, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab them. The sense of dread grew with each passing minute, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on them like a physical weight. Finally, they saw it, the entrance to Hollow Creek. The town was a ghostly silhouette in the mist, its crumbling buildings barely visible through the fog. The car came to a stop at the edge of town, the engine sputtering before falling silent. They were here. No one spoke as they got out of the car, the heavy silence of the town enveloping them. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the only sound was the distant echo of Halloween music carried on the wind. They walked down the main street, their footsteps the only sign of life in the desolate town. The houses were in various stages of collapse, their windows shattered, doors hanging off hinges. It was as if the town had been frozen in time, a snapshot of a moment long past. But there was something else, something just out of sight. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, but whenever they turned to look, there was nothing there. They reached the town square, where a large fountain stood in the center. The water was dark and murky, reflecting the pale moonlight in an unsettling way. Surrounding the square were several statues, each one depicting a resident of the town. Their faces were twisted in expressions of terror, as if they had seen something unimaginable in their final moments. "Let's get this over with," Jake said, his voice shaking. "We'll take some pictures and then we're out of here." But as he raised his camera, the mist around them thickened, and the statues seemed to come alive. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and the air was filled with a low, droning sound. It was the same sound they had heard on the radio. "Do you hear that?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The fountain erupted in a geyser of dark water, and from its depths emerged a figure. A woman, her face pale and ghostly, her eyes black voids. She floated above the water, her hair billowing around her like smoke. "You should not have come here," she whispered, her voice echoing through the square. "This town is cursed, and now, so are you." The statues moved, their stone bodies creaking as they turned to face the friends. The droning sound grew louder, and the mist swirled around them, trapping them in a vortex of terror. The woman raised her hands, and the mist closed in, suffocating them, pulling them into the depths of despair. Jake, Lisa, and Eric felt the world around them fade away, replaced by an endless void. The last thing they heard was the woman's voice, whispering in their ears, "Welcome to Hollow Creek. You will never leave." When they were found weeks later, their car was parked at the edge of the forest, its battery drained and the radio still crackling with static. The friends were never seen again, their fates sealed on that cursed Halloween night road trip. The second story is about the Hitchhiker's curse. Halloween night had always been the highlight of the year for Sam, Jenna, and Mark. The trio had a tradition of attending haunted attractions, seeking out the scariest experiences they could find. This year, they had driven out to a remote location for an event that promised to be the most terrifying yet: the Haunted Highway, a sprawling, immersive horror experience that took place on an abandoned stretch of road. The event had been promoted heavily on social media, with videos of past year's scares going viral on various horror recap channels and Reddit Horror Stories podcasts. The night began like any other. They drove through the darkness, the excitement palpable in the car. Sam, who was driving, had the Halloween soundtrack from the 1978 classic playing softly in the background, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Jenna and Mark, sitting in the back, were scrolling through the event's social media page, watching horror movie reaction videos from previous years. "This place looks intense," Jenna said, her eyes wide with anticipation. "I've heard the scares are so good that people have nightmares for weeks after." "Perfect," Mark replied, grinning. "Exactly what I'm hoping for." They arrived at the starting point of the haunted highway just after sunset. The road was lined with Halloween decorations, grinning jack-o'-lanterns, fake cobwebs, and flickering lanterns that cast long shadows across the pavement. Fog machines filled the air with a spooky mist, and eerie Halloween sounds, like distant whispers and ghostly moans, played through hidden speakers. The event was everything they had hoped for. As they drove down the haunted road, actors in terrifying costumes jumped out from the shadows, and elaborate set pieces recreated scenes straight out of their worst nightmares. There was even a portion of the road where the car had to stop, and a group of ghosts surrounded them, tapping on the windows with pale, bony fingers. The experience was so immersive that for a moment it felt as though they had truly crossed into another world. After an hour of scares, they reached the end of the haunted route, their nerves frayed but their spirits high. The event was over, and they were left to navigate the lonely, winding roads back to civilization. Sam, still riding the adrenaline high, was driving faster than usual, the thrill of the night pushing him to take the curves with a bit more speed. As they rounded a particularly sharp bend, they saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, illuminated by their headlights. She was dressed in a long, flowing gown that billowed in the wind, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked out of place, like something out of a gothic horror novel. Sam slowed the car and exchanged glances with Jenna and Mark. "What's she doing out here?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with unease. "Maybe she's part of the event," Jenna suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. The woman raised her hand in a silent plea for help, and without thinking, Sam pulled over. She approached the car slowly, her movements deliberate, almost ethereal. When she reached the passenger side window, Sam rolled it down. "Are you okay?" he asked, peering at her through the dim light. I need a ride," she said, her voice soft and melodic, but with an edge that sent a shiver down his spine. "I'm lost." Something about her felt off, but none of them could place it. Maybe it was the way she seemed to blend into the night, or the strange calm in her eyes, but despite their reservations, they couldn't just leave her there. "Hop in," Sam said, unlocking the door. She slid into the back seat beside Jenna, who immediately felt a chill creep over her. The woman's presence was unsettling, but Jenna shook it off as nerves from the haunted experience. They continued driving in silence, the woman giving only vague directions that seemed to lead them further into the middle of nowhere. The once exciting drive was now fraught with tension. The car's atmosphere had shifted, becoming oppressive, as if the darkness outside was seeping in. Mark tried to make conversation, asking the woman where she was from and how she ended up on the side of the road, but her answers were always brief and non-committal. Eventually he gave up, the silence in the car growing thicker. As they drove, strange things began to happen. The radio, which had been playing soft Halloween lo-fi music, started to emit static, the familiar tunes warping into something unsettling. The car's temperature seemed to drop, and the windows fogged up despite the heater being on. The woman remained silent, staring straight ahead with an unnerving stillness. "I don't like this," Jenna whispered to Sam, her breath visible in the cold air. "Something's wrong." Sam obeyed without thinking, his mind clouded by an inexplicable fog. They turned onto a narrow, unpaved road that led them into a dense forest. The trees closed in around them, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The only illumination came from the car's headlights, which seemed to dim the further they went. The road narrowed until it was barely wide enough for the car to pass. The GPS had long since lost its signal, leaving them with no way of knowing where they were or how to get back. "Where are we?" Mark asked, his voice rising with panic. "This doesn't feel right. It's close." the woman said, her voice cold and distant. Just a little further. Sam's instincts screamed at him to stop, to turn the car around and get out of there, but his hands wouldn't respond. It was as if an invisible force was guiding him, pushing him deeper into the woods. They finally emerged into a clearing, and what they saw made their blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated house, its windows shattered and its roof caving in. The car's headlights cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, revealing twisted shapes that looked disturbingly human. The woman opened the door and stepped out, her movements fluid and graceful. She turned to face them, her eyes locking onto Sam's. "You've brought me home," she said, a smile spreading across her face. But it was not a smile of gratitude. It was something darker, more sinister. Who are you?" Sam stammered, finally finding his voice. The woman's form began to change, her features distorting into something monstrous. Her eyes turned black, her skin paling to an unnatural shade. She seemed to grow taller, her limbs elongating as she transformed before their eyes. "I've been waiting for someone to bring me back," she hissed, her voice no longer melodic but guttural and filled with malice. "And now that I'm here, you'll join me." The car's doors locked with a loud click, trapping them inside. Sam frantically tried to start the engine, but it refused to turn over. The temperature in the car plummeted, frost creeping up the windows as they watched in horror as the woman approached. Jenna screamed as the woman's face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging up the window. "Let us go!" Jenna cried, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The woman's laughter filled the car, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. "You're mine now," she whispered, her voice echoing in their minds. The fog outside thickened, swirling around the car like a living thing. It pressed against the windows, seeping through the cracks, filling the car with a suffocating chill. They could barely see the woman now, but they could feel her presence, cold and malevolent, as if she were inside the car with them. In a final act of desperation, Sam slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, tires screeching against the dirt. The woman's laughter followed them as they sped out of the clearing, back down the narrow road, the fog chasing them like a predator. They drove for what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes, the twisted trees blurring past as they raced to escape. Finally, the fog began to thin, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. The car's engine roared to life, as if whatever had been holding it back had finally released its grip. They didn't stop until they reached the highway, the lights of distant towns finally appearing on the horizon. Only then did Sam pull over, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Jenna and Mark were silent, their faces pale and haunted. They never spoke of the woman again, or the cursed house in the woods. They returned home, trying to pretend that nothing had happened. But the memory of that night lingered, a dark shadow that would never fade. Years later, when Sam was cleaning out his car, he found something under the passenger seat, an old, dusty locket. Inside was a picture of the woman, her eyes cold and lifeless. Sam threw it away without a second thought, but he knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Some things you can never escape. The third story is about the lost highway. Halloween had always been special for Sarah and Michael. Instead of their usual routine, they decided to take a shortcut down an old highway after a Halloween party. Despite Sarah's unease, Michael reassured her it was a faster route home. As they drove down the narrow, winding road, the atmosphere quickly became unsettling. The trees grew twisted, and the landscape transformed into something unfamiliar. The usual night sounds vanished, replaced by oppressive silence. Sarah's anxiety grew as the road stretched endlessly with no other cars in sight, and the landscape turned increasingly nightmarish. Suddenly, a dense, impenetrable fog enveloped the car, making it nearly impossible to see. The road twisted in disorienting ways, and Sarah whispered that they were lost. Michael grew uneasy as well. But before he could respond, a figure appeared in the road. The man stood still, dressed in tattered clothes, his face hidden in shadow. Michael slammed on the brakes, stopping just feet from the man. Slowly, the man lifted his head, revealing pale, hollow eyes. He began to walk toward the car. Michael froze, unable to move. As the car's engine sputtered and died, the man pressed a frost-covered hand against the window, and just as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. The fog lifted, the engine roared back to life, and Michael sped away. Terrified, they continued down the road, which grew even more bizarre, with twisted trees and distant wails. Eventually, they spotted a faint light in the distance, a house. Desperate, they approached it, hoping for help. The house was dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging roof, but they had no other choice. Inside, a single candle flickered on a table. The door slammed shut behind them, and they heard a low, guttural whisper warning them to leave. The walls seemed to close in, and shadows grew darker. Panicking, they ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. Just when they thought all hope was lost, the door flew open, and they escaped into the night. They raced back to the car, speeding away as the road finally straightened out, leading them home. But the experience left a lasting mark. Every Halloween since, they've heard a faint whisper in the night, a reminder of the horrors they encountered on the lost highway. Proof that some roads are better left unexplored. Halloween is a night filled with ghostly stories and haunted memories, but for some, the horrors are all too real. These road trips started as simple drives, but they ended as tales of terror that will never be forgotten. So the next time you hit the road on Halloween night, remember these stories and keep your wits about you, because you never know what might be waiting in the shadows.